In this episode, I discuss the 4 cons to practicing infinite banking. I'm Nate. I make sense out of money. This is Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered. If you've listened to this show for any period, any amount of time, you know that I'm a huge fan. I'm passionate about the infinite banking concept. I love what it does in people's lives. I've seen what it does in my own life. I've seen what it does for hundreds, if not thousands, of our clients' lives. And I'm very passionate about how the benefits and the pros to practicing IBC. But one thing that can easily get stuck under the floorboard is the idea that, hey, it's not all perfect here in the IBC world. There are certainly cons to practicing infinite banking. And I brought this up before in our podcast where I described there is absolutely no financial strategy that is the best financial strategy. Just that entire idea needs to go by the wayside. There is no best investment for you to make. There's nothing that is the best per se, because we are in the world of finance, we're always dealing with unknown futures. Unknown events are going to happen. Black swan events are going to happen and radically change everything that we know. Who knows what this new AI, artificial intelligence boom might bring about and how it's going to change society. There's no such thing as the best plan, the best investment, because we're dealing in a world of unknowns. So what we actually have before us with every financial decision and most decisions in life, but certainly with every financial decision, we are left with a set of pros and cons that lay before us. And it is up to us to choose whether we want to go with one route or the other, knowing what we know right now, knowing what's good and what's bad about it, and determining if it's right for us based on your specific goals. Like, in other words, a business can get launched with very different goals set out before it, let's just say. And individuals are the same way with your wealth building trajectory. You can set out with certain goals that may not be the same as the next guy. It may not be the same as the next guy. And business owners can start a business with completely different trajectories. One guy just says, I want to be in business because I hate working for other people, and I'm content making $200,000 a year once we get the business off the ground. His next door neighbor may say, I want to start a business because I want to become a billionaire. I'm going to start the next business thing. I want to buy a business that can go public. I want to get into business that can go public. I have these bigger, grander scales. And obviously, the strategies you would implement to achieve those end goals are going to be different because different strategies reach different end goals. And that's the same thing about everything in life financially. So I wanted to preface that as we dive into the 4 biggest cons to practicing IBC, to understand, yes, there's absolutely some cons involved when you get started in IBC. It's not all perfect. It's not all roses. There are certainly things that we have to overcome. And many of these you're probably aware of, but I wanted to target what I feel are the 4 biggest cons that you would have to say, in spite of these cons, this is a strategy I want to do because of all the pros that, of course, this podcast is devoted to mentioning, as well as our free course online at livingwealth.com. So I'm going to dive into the 4 cons. As I said, some of them you probably already know. I'm going to use the whiteboard as well, just to kind of keep track of where we're going. But the first con that I'm going to mention is that, and most of you would know this, that it's technically, we could say, expensive to get started. Or you could say that IBC is a slow starter. And if you've done any sort of research over time, you very well know that this is true. That to get into IBC, it means you have to purchase a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy and use that as your capital warehouse for the future. So you will put money into the policy, and you're not going to receive a profit usually for years down the road. You're building this banking system to last for a long time. So there's this obvious con that whenever you compare doing infinite banking to something else, that's what I'm trying to bring up, by the way, that there's pros and cons to everything. So like you could say a pro to putting money into a bank account is that all my money's there right away, and most of them have no fees. And so you can earn a little bit of interest in a savings account with no cost to it. So you say, okay, that's one banking method. Why would anyone ever choose the expensive, slow start where I can put money in? I don't even have all my money available to me right away. Well, it's obvious that there's a subsequent pro on the backside, but that's not the goal of this episode. This goal of the episode is just to pinpoint. By the way, I wanted to mention this even before we got started, and I've already been guilty of doing what I was going to intend not to do, which is I don't want to sugarcoat things. I noticed that a lot of people who do like IBC con videos or something like that, like on YouTube or whatever, they'll mention some of the cons, but then they'll also try to turn every con into a pro. They're like, I mean, it's a con, but I mean, when you think about it like this, and it's actually turned out to be a pro. And I would say that, yeah, this is a true con. I mean, there are reasons, of course, why you might overcome the con to get to the pro. But what I am bringing up is it's simply, hey, it's expensive to get in. This is not some sort of get-rich-quick scheme at all. I mean, it's a lifelong endeavor to become your own banker. That's what you're signing up for. It's not cheap to do this, per se. It doesn't get started fast. It's not profitable very fast. So you have to understand that going in, that, yeah, if I'm going to become my own banker, I'm going to have to sink capital into the business of banking, into this policy, in order for the business to get off the ground and become profitable as time goes on. And so that's different than maybe some other opportunities that are available to us. So that's certainly, and that would be the number one con for everyone's video ever listed, is that, hey, it takes time for policies to mature and become profitable. So it's expensive to get in, per se. It's a slow starter. And, you're not going to get rich overnight doing IBC by any stretch. It is certainly a long-term goal. So that's certainly one of the main cons, and probably the premier con for everybody. If it was simply, hey, Nate, if this show right now was answering the question, why does everybody not do this? This would be the number one reason. Because they would look at it and say, I don't want that con. I'm going to avoid that con. I don't want the fact to put in, pay premiums and not have all the money go to cash value right away. I don't want that. This would be the number one con everyone would list. The second one that I wanted to mention is that it's confusing. Infinite banking is confusing. And I think that's important to state. By the way, for all of you listening who say, I don't always understand everything going on in IBC world and inside these policies and how to implement it, well, welcome to the club. I mean, it certainly is a con. It's confusing to get into this. There's confusion on many different areas, which is why, and partly in the second one I'm going to mention, kind of a second point, because it's confusing, it requires research and sophistication. So because of that, this is certainly a con. It's not something you can easily get into and understand everything right away. You can understand enough to get started pretty quickly, but it's certainly, you're going to run into other areas that you're confused about. So, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to mention, it requires research. People are looking for, whether they want to say it or not, they're technically in the financial world. Many people are so clueless about what they really want out of their money and what it should be doing, that they're hoping that a salesperson will talk to them really quickly and sell them on an idea that they can buy into and hit the ground running with it. And IBC is honestly sold that way a decent amount, and it's a shame, because all of the horror stories from IBC world come from people who didn't actually do the research beforehand. They don't actually understand it well enough. A buddy said, you got to go talk to this guy, do this IBC thing. It's really awesome. They give a couple little tricks about it, some little tips about it, and talked about the benefits of a policy, and people will sign up for it. And they don't even have any idea what it means to use policies to become your own banker. And so and this is why a lot of people don't do it as well. So the first biggest con is that it's expensive. The next one is that it's confusing. People start learning about it. They're like, there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn about this. You have to understand enough about how policies work and are designed. Like, you got base premiums and paid up addition rider, and you're trying to figure out how to design it accordingly. And then you've got policy loans that somehow magically don't affect the growth of the policy, but then you're paying interest back, and you're trying to figure out how all that works. And that's just the policy side. Then it's even confusing. Okay, I have the policy. I believe I want the policy. I believe in the concept, but how do I implement it? This is why this is different than making an investment. This is implementing a strategy. And this strategy requires a level of financial sophistication. It really does. I've said many times before that if you're not financially literate and sophisticated financially before infinite banking, it's unlikely that you will be after infinite banking. And in fact, you're not going to have fun doing this. And I think you should be just frank with yourself, whether or not you're ready to adopt a more sophisticated strategy. And the reason why this is a con is because you can compare that to simple things. There are other things that are simple, that do not require sophistication, that don't even require a technical strategy at all. In fact, the default options of the world, that, just getting into a 401k, you show up at a job, you're automatically plugged into a 401k, they're taking money out of your salary and putting into this account. You don't know what they're doing in the account all that much. You don't even really care. You're just saving money for retirement. You're hoping there will be enough there whenever you retire. And there's no you don't have to research much to do that. It's actually automatic. You're automatically enrolled. There's not a lot of research involved. There's not a lot of financial sophistication required to take part in those types of default strategies. So and that is one of the reasons why it is absolutely true that business owners and entrepreneurs and active investors tend to feel compelled by infinite banking in a far shorter time frame and far more easily than maybe a W-2 employee does, because they're already used to doing research and on financial matters, because they're running this business and they're having to research a lot of things on how to run their business, or they're very sophisticated financially if they're an active investor trying to find new deals, and they've got to be able to weed through those. So it requires research and sophistication, which automatically excludes some people who don't want to do research or who are not that sophisticated at the time. That's whenever you get into the horror story. So that's why I've tried to bring up, don't do this if you don't really believe that you have a high level of financial sophistication to some degree. You have to be able to understand how this is going to impact things better than just, hey, it's tax-free growth, it's guaranteed, and you can use it. And you can borrow your money and have it still grow for you. So the second one was that it's confusing. It's a con. It's not something it's not something you could dream up by yourself. It took someone to invent the strategy. It took Nelson Nash to write the book about the strategy for people to actually understand and start piercing through the confusion and all the noise in the financial world to understand how this works. But nonetheless, it's going to be brand new for almost everybody.
Are you tired of feeling like everyone has their hand in your pocket? At Living Wealth, we believe in challenging the status quo. After all, most of those conventional tools only seem to make someone else rich. Let us show you how to take back control by banking on yourself. Visit livingwealth.com/escapethebank. You'll receive instant access to what we call the beginner's course. This free, in-depth, easy-to-follow course teaches people how to create and profit from infinite banking. We not only discuss the philosophy and principles behind infinite banking, but also offer real-life examples to demonstrate how it works. Even folks experienced with infinite banking often tell us they learned a ton too. So, it's worthwhile regardless of your experience level. Stop letting banks and Wall Street dictate your financial future. Again, that's livingwealth.com/escapethebank to gain access to the free course today. Now back to Nate and Holly.
The third one I wanted to add as a con is that, and this one's kind of an odd one, is that it requires an agent. And for some people, they're like, I agree with you, Nate. That's really crazy and ridiculous. And other you like, I don't care. But the reason I brought this up is that it's hard to be independent in this. In other words, if you wanted to get started with infinite banking, you can't actually do it on your own. You can't actually go to the insurance company and say, I'm going to buy a policy and I want it to look like this and this and this. And here you go. They will actually require you to go through an agent. This is not the end of the world. This is not the biggest of all cons. But I noticed that some people say it is because they say the agents are all in it for the money and or whatever it is. But it's actually not. It's not the biggest of all cons. But it is true, as I mentioned, it's hard to be independent because you can't. You have to go through an agent. And this is one of the things that I think I love to bring up more often than not is I think clients get too caught up in policy design. They think that the policy design is going to be the most important piece, when in reality, you have to get an agent in order to get a policy. That is how the industry is built in the world of whole life insurance. You should feel highly motivated to choose an agent or an advisor of some sort that you want to build a lifelong relationship with, that you think can add value beyond just the design and sale of a life insurance product. That is a low value task. So if someone's just selling to you the ability to design and sell you a life insurance policy, that's a low level value. You really want to work with an IBC focused advisor when you're doing infinite banking. You wouldn't want to go down the street to Northwestern Mutual or New York Life and just talk to their rep. And he says, yeah, I understand how to do it. And he'll build you a policy. He'll design you a policy. And in fact, it might be pretty good. What I wanted to say is there's actually quite a few iterations of policy design that work great. There are many ways to build policies, and all of them can work very, very well. It's actually rare these days to run into someone who has a improperly designed policy. Most policies are designed good. They're fine. Some may be better than others for certain instances, but nonetheless, the policy design is a low value addition to the world. You could go down to any old life insurance shop with a basic level of understanding and know how to design the policy. but you have to go through an agent no matter what. So you should choose an agent that's actually going to produce value. Choose a firm that's actually going to produce value beyond just the design and sale of the product itself. But the reason why I think this is a con is because it reduces your ability to be totally independent. You have to always go through an agent really to get things done, which I don't think is the end of the world, especially if the agent is producing value to you for sure. But it would be a con compared to other things, is what I'm trying to bring up. So there's other things you don't exactly have to require to go through somebody in a similar sense. And now that I'm thinking about it more and more, maybe that's actually slightly incorrect. But for the most part, you can get into different types of investments without requiring an intermediary to go between you and them. And even in the world of the stock market, you typically use some sort of brokerage accounts, but you don't actually have to go through a person really. There's so much online, technological investment opportunities out there that you don't exactly need anybody to help guide you. You can go do it your own if you want to. You can go open up your own IRA at a Vanguard fund or something like that and invest some money without needing to go through anybody. And the reason why this can be a con is that you're not totally independent, and there are crappy agents out there. In fact, there's many of you who are listening to the show who got your very first policy from a crappy agent. You're like, I just kind of wasted my time and energy and money with this guy because I really should have worked with somebody else. So agents are a dime a dozen. IBC requires an agent technically to get involved, and that can cause some problems, especially if the agent is crappy in a lot of different ways. So that's number 3. The fourth and last one I want to talk about today, it does kind of correlate with number 2 as well, but it requires discipline. So infinite banking requires discipline. And once again, I debated whether to even add this to the con list, and I'm going to tell you why I did. And the reason why I debated that it may not make sense to add this to the con list is because I think everything in the financial world requires some level of discipline in order to be successful. If you want to be successful financially, you probably are going to have some level of discipline. If you don't have any level of discipline, you're probably going to be unsuccessful financially. So it is true that this could be a con for anything. This could be a con for life if we're going to take it to its furthest extreme. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that IBC requires a new level of discipline that may not always be required from other types of strategies, which we've already brought up. We're so not used to having total access to all of our money all the time. We're oftentimes used to locking money up in various different pools and reservoirs. And, the conventional, retirement program, IRA, 401k, health savings account and brokerage accounts. People just lock money up in there with no intention to use it. They don't even think that they're free to use it, which is why I would say is a con to that world. But I guess you can morph it into a pro depending on who you are. But nonetheless, they kind of set it aside. They separate it from themselves and they never plan to use it again. With IBC, when you start a policy, you are putting money in and you understand fully that you have 100% access to the capital accumulating in the policy, and that Nate is probably, or whoever, is going to encourage you to put it to work and to use the system that you're implementing. So you're going to not only are you going to have access to money, which you never really thought you had before, you're going to be recommended and pushed and guided to actually put it to use the money. And this is why I say it can be a con to the system, is that it actually requires some level of discipline that others may not. The discipline's actually handled for you. In this one, you actually have to have true financial discipline. Almost every instance of an infinite banking gone wrong is when somebody gets into policies and they start using policy money to do a lot of things without any real sophistication or discipline on the back end. So they end up just really blowing all the money. They end up spending all the money, and they don't really have a very good plan of repayment or a very good strategy to repay themselves. They lack financial discipline. And so here's what I'm trying to bring up. And once again, you just have to be honest with yourself. If you're not that disciplined financially, which I hope if that's you, that you're humble enough to admit that, then IBC may cause some problems. It may cause some problems because you're suddenly going to have unlimited access to your money to go do whatever you want with it. And you might end up, being a bad steward of the money. So if you are honest with yourself and you have a discipline problem financially, you're always living on more than you make. You can't seem to, no matter how much money you do make, your expenses tend to rise to match that. And you're really having a hard time gaining steam. You should get that under control before doing IBC. Without discipline, IBC can actually compound those problems. Can actually compound them, as opposed to doing something else financially like a 401k or an IRA where you set money aside, you can't touch it. At least you believe you can't for sure. That can actually help someone who is trying to gather more and more discipline. So I'd say These are the 4 main cons of infinite banking. Number one, and the biggest one of all for almost everybody, is that it's a slow starter. It's expensive to get into. It's not like it's just something that you can just set money into right away and be profitable like a savings account. There's cost to getting the business off the ground. Of course, IBC proponents like me believe that the cost is worth the lifelong trajectory that IBC puts you on, but this was a con video, not a pro video. So it's a slow starter, it's expensive. The next one is that it's confusing. It requires research and sophistication. This is not for everybody. It's certainly not for people who don't love learning about things. You're going to get yourself in trouble. There are other things that are way less confusing that don't require any sophistication. IBC is not one of those. Number 3, you can't be independent. It requires an agent. You have to go through somebody. This can be a pro and con kind of put together. It would be good to get someone, I hope like myself, who strives to be someone of value to their clients. But nonetheless, you don't know who you're going to get all the time. And so it requires an agent. You can't just do it on your own. That's not even an option here. And lastly, it requires discipline. In fact, if you don't have discipline, IBC can end up compounding financial problems as opposed to solving them. So it requires discipline. If you're undisciplined financially, don't even do this until you get your discipline thing down. And that's what I'm trying to bring up. I think everything requires discipline, but IBC requires a touch more than most things in order to be successful. Remember, IBC has a ton of value. Everything in the financial world, no matter what, has a set of pros and cons. You determine which set of pros and cons you like, depending on what you want to do financially and the goals you want to have. And so you get compelled or pushed away from different financial strategies based on their list of pros and cons. There is no such thing as the best solution with only pros and no cons. It does not exist anywhere in the world. That's why it's important for you to understand who you are, who you want to become, and start to set forth a path that you would like to achieve. Then the tools and strategies that are available to the world, including IBC, you'll be able to self-identify which ones make sense to help you get to your plan and which ones kind of are a tangent to it. Don't really make a lot of sense to get into at that time. Hope this has been helpful. Once again, if you're liking the content we produce, it means the world to us to spread the news through commenting, liking, especially subscribing on YouTube, and rating and reviewing the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and the various other places you can get it. It means the world to us. It's the best way to organically expand the reach of our show. It's a pleasure as always, and we will see you next week on Dollars and Nonsense. Remember, if you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered.
Listener, one last thing before you go. Start your journey towards financial security and wealth today. Visit livingwealth.com/escape the bank. Upon completing this course, you'll have all the information that you'll need to see if infinite banking is right for you. Again, go to livingwealth.com/escape the bank.